Welcome to the Nightbear Box presents The Art of Wargaming. I'm Yaga Malark. Onishiro was not able to make it today, but joining me instead is my friend Thumbs.
Hello.
And we're going to talk to you today about strategic offense. But before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about Thumbs. Thumbs is a fella I know from doing Belagarth and also from high school, but how long have you been fighting, Thumbs?
I started my freshman year of high school, which would have been 2003. I started a few months before you did, because I started in the summer, and then we became friends in the fall, and one day you dropped out of a tree and were like, "Hey, buddy, what you doing?" And I just kind of looked at you for a moment. And I went, I think you would like this game.
See, I'm glad you said that, because I tell that story sometimes and people doubt the validity of it.
No, literally dropped out of a tree.
A strange man hiding in trees, distributing swords. Wrong story.
Close enough. You did give me a sword.
But Thumbs, you're part of the Gelf, aren't you?
Yep. The Gelfin Empire is a unit mostly in Idaho and Oregon. There's a few of us in Colorado, California, and now 3 of us in Montana.
Right on.
We're 15, 20 years old, and usually at least one of us is helping run Chaos Wars because it's owned by Dop, who is not a founder, I don't think, but one of the earliest members.
And from what I understand, like a lot of units pride themselves on being like a really strong fighting unit or a really strong RP unit. The Gelf have a decently strong field presence, but what you all have on lockdown is your nightlife and your camp life, if I'm not mistaken.
We look for people who bring something good to the unit. It doesn't have to be on the field. We have people who are uninvolved in nightlife, but they are on the field constantly kicking butt.
Sorry, I just swore at my hand because I did exactly what I told Thumbs not to do, and I bumped the table as I was... it's a practical demonstration.
Thank you very much. Anyways, we bring in someone that brings to the unit. So we have people who are really good. We call them responsive elves. They are the good planners. We have the good partiers. We have the good organizers. We have the good fighters.
Sure.
As long as you bring something into the unit, that's more important to us than, like, I am the strongest fighter in the history of fighting.
Well, again, it gives you guys a good mix. Like, long term, it ends up, like I said, I had the honor of camping with the Gelf one year when I was being a mercenary for them.
I couldn't make it that year because my wisdom teeth exploded.
Yeah.
And so I hired you to be our mercenary and to be in my spot.
And I believe I was worth my pay.
That's good.
And when I say mercenary, folks, I know that we've talked about Belagarth as being a somewhat role-playing game, so it might be easy for you to assume that my character is role-playing a mercenary, but no, I am actually a mercenary. Most of my Belagarth career, I have gone to events and had other people kind of help me get there and either pay for food or pay for booze or whatever while I was there, and the trade-off was I fought for them. So.
I paid for your event fee, and I think we paid for part of your food or something like that year.
Something like that, yeah.
You were part of the kitchen, I think.
Yeah, yep. Yeah, so that's an actual thing you can do in Belagarth, FYI.
I miss doing it. I love the Gelf. I'm super happy where I am, but there was something kind of nice about, like, I don't know where I'm going to be this week. Let's kind of flip a coin and see who gives me stuff.
One of the nice things about being a Dark Angel and being isolated at the moment, I mean, we're trying to grow in the West right now, but one of the nice things about being a Dark Angel and being isolated is I can, even though I'm a part of an organized unit, I can still mercenary sometimes, because I'll just do some research and be like, okay, none of my unit mates are going to be there. I might as well get a free night of drinking out of it.
If I'm ever going east, that's largely my plan.
No, it's not a bad way to get around, if people are, of course, willing to do it for you. But one of the other things I want to talk to you about specifically, Thumbs, is you have been Stygia's realm leader for how many years?
Almost 4 years. I am finishing up my term as the president, or my second term as the president, and then I was vice president for 2 years before that. And then I wasn't a realm leader, but for, 5 years, I ran the DGMA, which was the Dreadgate Mercenary Alliance, which was a unit that Malark and I were both in. And I didn't have any say in, like, realm policy, but people listened to me for some reason. I never understood why, but they did.
It's that soothing baritone. Always helps. So that's a long career of public service, because it's not like real politicians where you get like a per diem and a living allowance. You're just doing this out of
It is all volunteer work.
Yeah.
I ran tourneys at Chaos Wars this year, and I ran the field the year before, like the entire field, tourneys, event points and stuff, and it was kind of a disaster. But I learned a lot, and that's really what was important. At Chaos Wars for the last 2 years, I was very determined that this upcoming year, touch tabled, that this upcoming year was going to be the year I don't do anything, and instead I volunteered to do more stuff.
I think Bellegrim are some of the few people I know, the only people I know on the planet that actually choose to take on more responsibility when they're on vacation.
Yeah. That was actually one of my lessons from the year before, was make sure you take time off, even if you're volunteering, even if you're doing stuff, because you will burn out, and you'll stop coming, and you'll lose something you love, and will lose a valuable part of the community.
Sure.
And this was the first event, one of the first events I went to with multiple squires. And that was like my big lesson for them. I'm like, you guys are all volunteering for a bunch of stuff, but you will take a point of time every day where you don't have to do anything.
I actually do a similar thing with my apprentices. I require them to have at least 1 hour of field fighting per day of the event. So, I mean, if that's a 3-day event and they just want to do 3 hours on one day, cool, that's awesome. Mm-hmm. I want them to fight at least one titled fighter for every day of the event. Same deal. If they want to get it all out of the way on one day, they can. And then 1 hour of volunteering for every day of the event. Which means that they can kind of space out as they want, because I know a lot of squires and a lot of apprentices who, like you say, they end up burning out. You know, they hit their title, or they may not even reach their title, and they decide that this game is too much work. And so, and this is in no way discouraging volunteerism, in no way discouraging those amazing people that go out of their way to make sure that we all have an amazing event. I'm just saying, y'all deserve some downtime too, and if you're not having at least a little bit of fun, you're doing yourself a disservice.
Then what's the point? You're going on vacation.
Yeah. You're paying to be there. Nobody's paying you to be there. It's cool that you want to do things and help out so that everybody can have a good time. But again, everybody's got to have a good time. That's kind of my point with that.
Yeah.
But despite all of this, you're thinking about, because your realm leadership is about to be over, but you're about to take the next step, if I understand correctly.
Possibly. I decided to run for president of the entire organization. Because when I decided to do it, no one had actually announced yet. And we were talking about, like, no, we really need this. It's not the world's biggest job, but it has to happen. We have to have a vice president if we're going to be, or not a vice president. I mean, we need that too. But
right.
You have to have a president if you're going to be a nonprofit like we are.
Sure. There needs to be a head to the board of directors and all
And I was like, well, I'll put my name in there, and it will terrify people who know me well enough that more people will volunteer. And a few people volunteered, but I had the thought that almost gets me into the most trouble in Belagarth is, well, if I'm going to do it, I'm gonna try. And so I'm trying. And who knows how it'll go. But when is this coming out?
I honestly don't know. We're still getting through the editor at the moment, and making sure that all the different streaming services know that we're not advocating for anything horrible. That we're just talking nerdery. Okay. So not too terribly long, or it could be a bit. I don't know.
Okay. I mean, the election's soon, so it's probably decided one way or the other by the time anyone hears this.
Very well could be. And I know Hakan is also running for it as well. Right?
Yep, Hakan is running for it. He is a old friend and roommate of you and I. He and I are actually running on a lot of the same, I guess, platforms.
Yeah, sure.
Of getting a few more a few more sources of income so we can afford to pay for stuff, working on helping new realms, units, whatever, start up. My big kind of dream goal for it would be to set up a little fund that people could apply for to get realm weapons, get loner gear if they're trying to start up a group and we have this much stuff, and we're like, all right, here's $50 towards buying supplies to make loner gear, whatever it is, but it has to be used specifically for that.
I imagine that would really help units that are in or realms that are starting in isolated areas actually get started.
I've been thinking about that a lot because we are the only realm in Montana.
Sure.
And I've wanted to start other realms, but it's hard because we're like, okay, we're a few hundred miles away from you, but if you make all this stuff and you start doing all these things, then you should totally do it too, and we'll see you every once in a while. So I've been, for the last few years, kind of low-key thinking of ways that we could help new groups start.
Sure.
Because it would be nice to not be the only realm in 300 miles.
Well, I'm glad that there's more than one person running on that policy, so that hopefully one of you gets it. And,
yeah.
Because that's one of the big things I see, too.
Squire, God, what's his name? I have never met this guy. He's out east. Squire Mudd. He's supposed to be a nice guy, but... Not to undersell him, I just don't know him.
I haven't met him either, but we're all the way here on the West Coast, so...
Yeah, we're pretty far removed.
That Great Grass Sea is actually quite an obstacle. One of the things I noticed in going east at all was when I went to Tennessee, there were units that were highly prominent. Like, everybody knew them on the East Coast. They had been around for a while. They won tournaments. Like, they were big deals that we had never heard of at all on the West Coast. Ravenous is one of those. You ever heard of Ravenous?
I've heard the name. I could not tell you literally anything about the unit. I thought it was a person for quite a while.
Yeah, they're a really cool unit from down in the southeast. They're extremely numerous, at least when I was out there, and they were really tearing up the field. But nobody ever heard of them. But when you're over there,
Everyone heard of them.
Everybody had heard of them. But when I was there, I was still a member of the Forsaken, and the Forsaken are fairly well known on the West Coast. But I went to the East Coast, and everybody was like, "For who? Is that a boy band?" You know.
Gelf has a little bit of knowledge on the East Coast because we have some crossover with Hellhammer and God Squad.
Okay.
Because God Squad pulled out of... God Squad were Gelf originally, and then they split to...
Right, do their thing.
Cousins, I guess. There's a decent amount of crossover between God Squad and Gelf.
Sure.
But we're still not nearly as well known. Like, any further east in Montana, most people are like, the what now?
But again, it's crazy how that happens on both sides, though, because again, there's a unit that I was a part of out there in the East, Vorshin, who is making waves, and a lot of people know of right now. Again, most people here in the West never heard of them.
I only know of them because of you.
Yeah. So this Great Grass Sea is definitely a thing. But hopefully, as whoever becomes the next president of Belagarth can help to bridge that a little bit.
Yeah, it would help if we could get just a few realms in the middle. Is kind of my thing.
I know there's somebody in Oklahoma. There's somebody, I don't know if she actually practices in Oklahoma, but I know there's a fighter in Oklahoma.
Nebraska, the Dakotas, Wyoming. If we could get one in Minnesota, that has a few more people than literally anything around there.
They also have about like 2 months of summer.
Yeah, I'm not saying it would be easy. I am saying, like, in the dream world, this would be perfect. If we could get a few more in Montana, it would help a lot, just because Montana has sizable, if not
so
populated.
We're selfish. We're selfish.
We are super want so many more people.
We'd love some neighbors. Well, right on. Well, good luck to you, and good luck to Hakan and to Squire Mudd.
I think it's Squire Mudd.
Or Sir Mudd. I don't want to be disrespectful. To Mr. Mudd. Yeah, best of luck to all three of you. Before we get into the meat and potatoes of the episode, though, I want to go back and correct something from the previous episode. I had mentioned in passing that the massed infantry strategy had worked for the Boer War. Now, anybody who heard this episode is shaking their heads. I apologize. I meant to say in the early part of the Boer War, this mass infantry strategy worked. It obviously did not win the overall Boer War because South Africa is, I believe, still part of the Commonwealth. So the British won. Spoiler alert. So, with that correction aside, we're going to move right into strategic offense. Now, Sun Tzu speaks about this a lot throughout The Art of War, but outthinking the enemy is going to kind of be our theme of this episode.
Okay.
The idea of mind games and knowledge actually playing a huge part in the way that battle unfolds.
We should admit, before we go farther, that you have done a ton of research for this, and I found out what the topic was about 30 minutes ago.
Yeah, Thumbs is doing me a solid filling in at the last minute, so...
Not to knock you at all, just so if they're like, wow, that Thumbs guy's kind of dumb, that's because I did not think about this at all, so this is all seat of the pants.
No, Thumbs is here to make me sound smart, and I'm here to make Thumbs look pretty.
Excellent.
That's why we're here for each other.
It's a good balance. It's worked for years.
But Sun Tzu talks a lot throughout this book about the idea of outsmarting the enemy. But we're going to speak about that a lot in this episode. And the first section of Strategic Offense deals a lot with that when he talks about the idea of winning without fighting. Now, in the ancient world, and when we're talking about like an actual battle, there are a lot of different ways to win without fighting. You can starve your enemy out. You can outmaneuver them politically. Trade routes, alliances, marriages, like there are 10,000 ways to win a war without fighting.
I was listening to a different podcast, Hardcore History, and they talked about how modern day, when we talk about negotiations, we don't think of them as super... We almost think of them as weak.
Yeah.
But in the old days, negotiations was one of the most effective ways you could win a war.
Oh, sure.
Because you could just bully people into doing what you wanted.
Nobody has to die. Nobody wastes resources.
It works out theoretically best for everyone.
But in terms of Belagarth or Warhammer 40k, the negotiations have broken down and battle is already upon us. If you're going to try to come into Belagarth without ever fighting...
At least onto the Belagarth field without ever fighting, it's not going to work. Anywhere else in Belagarth, there's all sorts of
Dagger here has healers, but we don't. But barring that, we have ourselves an extremely violent game that is supposed to be demonstrating what a war is, but without people actually dying. So, the negotiations are broken down, the armies have come to the field, but we're all still trying to be friends. We're all still trying to get together at the end of the night, at the end of the day, and drink around the same fire and tell stories and be a community. So, when I'm speaking of mind games, I'm not actually talking about things that
we're not doing real
cool.
psyops here.
No, we're not doing real psyops. I'm not flying around somebody's tent at night trying to keep them awake with
flashing lights and stuff.
Yeah.
Blasting in sync.
Now, some might argue that some of the EDM shows are exactly that. But,
Pub and dub every year.
But short of doing actual dick move, like psyop mind games, the ones I'm talking about are, one of the similar ones I use is, if you see me off field, you'll notice that I'm a very slight person. I'm 6'3", but I'm only 160 pounds. I'm not heavy. I'm not very muscular. I'm not all that intimidating, to be honest. And so one of the things
you think that. I know a lot of people terrified of you.
Well, but I think part of that is the fact that I angle my gear to make me terrifying. I go after garb that makes me look like I'm bigger than I am. I wear armor that makes me look like I actually have definition to my shoulders.
You're using the pufferfish defense.
Absolutely. If you ain't got it, you fake it or something like that, right? And then I also wear a helm that obscures the majority of my face and gives you this kind of faceless killer idea motif.
I'm not going to lie. I'm going to humble brag here for a moment. That helm I made was the first helm I ever made, and it's the one you still wear.
It's absolutely beautiful.
It is one of my favorite things I've ever made, partly just because you own it so strongly. I put it on a t-shirt once.
I know. That's a great t-shirt.
I still need to give you that t-shirt.
You do.
I have a copy.
But yeah, so these are the kind of ideas I'm saying about mind games. And so for me, feeling that this is also a mind game for me, right? Because like you say, other people might see me in a certain way or might have this perception of me. That doesn't matter. If I don't think that I'm scary, if I don't think that I'm somebody to be intimidated by, I'm not going to walk that way or swing that way on the field. But if I've already been playing mind games on myself and I've got myself beefed up in my head to be this big mindless killing machine that is coming for you, well then the mind game isn't just working on my opponent to demoralize them and maybe make them a little bit more sloppy in their fighting, but it's working on me to build me up and to put me into more of a killing mood.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's kind of the same idea of like if you get pretty before you go out on a night out. I know before I go out, I'll really primp myself. I'll actually comb my hair back, do nice clean, crisp edges to my facial hair. Like you pretty yourself up and it makes you feel good, you know?
The kind of 80s capitalist equivalent was dress for the job you want.
Yes, and in this particular case, I want to be a mindless psychotic killer. So you dress for the job.
For as long as I've known you, that's been your dream.
You know, if I wasn't a moralist, we might pursue this as a more serious profession. So the mind games start with kind of that idea. How do you get into the head of your enemy? Eye contact is often a really good way to use this too. I notice a lot of fighters on the field will just use eye contact, and a static facial expression can get into the heads of an inexperienced fighter.
I have stopped an entire part of a line at a big event, and I'm not bad. I'm a decent fighter, but I am not top of the line, top of the meta at all by any shot. But I stood there with my big shield and my big club, and I gave him a cocky look, and there was no one within like 15 feet of me, and the entire line stopped because they were like, well, I don't know that guy, but he sure looks like he knows what he's doing.
And yeah, that's the attitude, though. Like, why take the chance? You know, this one person has strode forward and confidently challenged 5 warriors. He's got to have the ability to back it up. We didn't.
We did not.
Neither Thumbs or I have that ability. But even being able to stop that line for just a second or a couple of seconds gives the rest of your teammates to move into a position where you might not actually have to put or back up your bark. With the smaller bite that is inevitably coming, so that's a huge part of the mind games too. Another part of the mind games is the, like you were saying, there's a reputation that precedes you. You know, a lot of people who hear, I know I talk about the elite blood falcons a lot on this show, but they're a really good example for a lot of different things, and their name carries something with it. Some people like them, some people don't like them, you know, but everybody knows when the elite blood falcons take the field, there's somebody to pay attention to.
Yeah, you can like them, you can dislike them, you can't pretend they don't exist.
Right.
This can actually backfire on you, though, too.
True.
At Chaos Wars this year, on one of the days I was out, they were having trouble because they were the biggest unit, not by a ton, but they were the biggest unit, and they were
drawing aggro.
Good. They were good enough that everyone knew that if we fought each other, the elite blood falcons would swing out behind this wall that they were hanging out behind and wreck us. So everyone punched the elite blood falcons, and then if we survived, we punched each other from there.
So yeah, the reputation precedes you, and if you can use that to your advantage, it works. But also, your enemies might take you seriously.
Yeah, and I'm sure it was really frustrating for them, but it was suicide to do literally anything else.
Oh, sure. Sure. And that's something else we're going to talk about a little bit later on when we're talking about numbers. But yeah, so mind games is just something, little tiny tweaks, little tiny adjustments that you can do to your appearance, to your behavior, to your manner of speech, that can kind of mess with your opponent and throw them a tiny bit off their game. Again, I'm not advocating trash talking. I'm not advocating discrimination of any kind or belittling or anything along those lines. We're still a civil game, and we still need to be able to sit down and be a community after the fight is done. But that being said, I'm not going to say I don't eyeball people.
No. If I ever put someone in the dirt, though, after the fight, I'll go, like, check up on them, help them get up or something. Or, like, I try to, most fights in between during the reset point, to say something nice to one of the other people on one of the other teams. So, because it just helps build that reputation of, like, okay, this isn't personal.
Right.
They're not going to stop, but it's a respect thing, not like I'm being a bully thing.
Right. There's a very fine distinction that needs to be met. And this same idea goes to outthinking your enemy. Obviously, if we're trying to outthink your enemy, I don't mean going so far to the edge of the rules that you're basically cheating. I don't mean finding the biggest cheese that you can possibly find and going extreme with that, because that's not actually outthinking the enemy. That's
breaking the game.
That's just breaking the game. I mean, outthinking the enemy is to say, for instance, Turkey Feathers, one of the best fighters on our field.
Yeah.
Probably the best fighter on our field on a fairly consistent basis.
He's the fighter to literally every new person I have to eventually, like, put my hand on their shoulder and go, don't worry, we all lose to him like that. You get used to it. And then they start winning eventually, and they feel like gods.
Sure.
But
with Turkey Feathers, one of the ways that I warm up anymore is that I will just watch him fight, and I'll be sitting there going, all right, which foot is Turkey favoring today? Is he doing flourishes? Is he doing a bunch of feints? Is he just being short and direct? I try to gauge, his mindset and where he's coming from, so that when I face him, I'm not doing it cold. I already know I'm going against somebody who is very much a threat, who is very much probably going to kill me. So I need to be on mentally. And one of the good ways that I can do that is go, okay, this is what I can kind of expect. I know that, the analysis is there. And so that can be a portion of outthinking the enemy. Another idea of outthinking the enemy is knowing the general tactic of a unit. One of the things we were talking about earlier was the early skirmishes between the Urukai and the DGMA here in Stygia. And when we would outthink them because they fought in a very specific way. They enjoyed facing the enemy head on and crushing them.
They were the Urukai. They wanted to be a horde that ran down people, and they were good at it.
And they did it. They did it exceptionally well.
They're still good at it when they're on their point.
Yes.
Like, they're not as big anymore. We're making them sound like they're a thing of the past. And that's not what we're
They're still around. They still do their thing. But this was something we had noticed about them. And so as the DGMA, we became far less focused on line fighting because, let's be honest, we couldn't hold a candle to them.
We never liked it.
They had the big boys. They had Teddy. They had Reaper. I mean, you guys probably don't know these people, but these were fellas that would be not out of place in an actual riot squad.
Reaper, I think, had actual riot shield training.
Now that you say that, I think he did.
That was at least the rumor. I haven't talked to the guy in probably
I
a decade,
took a shield check from him to the chest. I believe it. But the Urukai, again, they were trained in that way. They were very direct. They were very good at destroying what was directly in front of them. And so us not being able to really face a front-on assault to them, tried to outthink them. And we did this in a couple of ways. The first one that comes to mind was we would often use other units, like you were saying with the EBF, to wear them down. If we ourselves could not hope to take on the Urukai, we could maneuver them into fighting other units and then maybe losing a player here, maybe losing a player here there, until the ground was a bit more equal when we ended up going against them.
The term we used a lot was herding sheep, which is really rude, and in retrospect, sorry.
A little derogatory, yeah.
I was 21-year-olds.
I'm so smart. I'm 21.
But the idea of if we can force any kind of conflict against them, we can weaken them even just a little bit. If we can even just drop some shields, that gives us a point that we can punch.
Sure.
And we weren't bad at the punch. It was just the sustained punch that we could not manage.
Yeah, we didn't have the same just manpower and punching power that they did. And the other way to do this is to not engage them where they're strong. To do something we've talked about before, which is wolf packing. And even if you're a smaller unit, you can engage the larger unit 2-on-1 in your favor.
Love wolf packing.
Well, sort of the Dark Angel.
Oh, it's like we haven't had a thing.
Yeah. An evolution of the form, as it were. But wolfpacking is, you're in a disparate formation, and then when one of your teammates engages somebody else steps in immediately and changes it from a one-on-one fight in that small microcosm to a 2-on-1 fight.
Especially if you can do it from two angles.
Sure, yeah.
They suddenly they will be open somewhere.
Right.
An opportunity will arise.
If you can hit them at a larger than 90 degrees, I would say. If you're hitting them at larger than a right angle, you're definitely opening them up. Like we were talking about in the last episode with the idea of the kill pocket, where there's no wrong way to throw a shot into a kill pocket because all of them have the potential to be lethal. It's the same idea with wolfpacking. If you can hit them at a wider angle, that's more effort that they have to do defending themselves with a shield. The shield isn't quite as useful as a static blocking implement anymore, and it splits their attention, which is huge. You can often kill somebody without having them see you at all. And there's a difference between being a chronic backstabber and a wolfpacker, and the difference is when you are one, you like to call yourself a wolfpacker.
Well, and with a wolf pack, you still will sometimes end up really facing off on person. You're using tactics as opposed to hiding.
Right. And again, with my body presence, I like to be the anvil.
I don't hide well. I'm a 250-pound man.
Me neither. Turkeys are same size, but he manages to hide. But we draw attention. We draw aggro, and so
I wear bright colors. I have no secrets about why I draw attention.
I wear black colors, and that seems to freak people out because it's big.
Buddy, you told me you wanted to look like a supervillain, so I made you look like a supervillain.
Thank you. You succeeded. I draw aggro, and it's great. So this is also outthinking the enemy, being able to maneuver in such a way that gives you an advantageous position out of a disadvantageous one. And then you had an example about outthinking the enemy, which involves patience, I believe, when you were talking about hanging back a little bit.
Oh, yeah. I am very rarely on the front line in the very start, or if I am, I will hang back a little bit while the line pushes forward, and then I'll just fill whatever gap is the most open. So, like, as I mentioned before, if there was no one in a 15-foot area, and I just came out there and stood and looked aggressive and stopped an entire line. Filling that gap is just being aware of your own weaknesses. I picked it up from Valis.
Right.
He was very much like, oh no, you were going to stand with me, and because we keep getting broken right here. This exact spot the last 3 fights.
Valis was the War Master who gave me my chain, and he's the one that I learned the stare down the line technique from as well.
Valis is daddy.
He's boss.
If
you're listening, Valis, we love you, we miss you.
We try to tell him often. Someone called me Valis recently. They were like, "Oh, you're the new Valis," and I was like, "You have no idea. That is the nicest thing anyone has ever said to me."
That's also blasphemy.
I don't disagree.
But yeah, so even you acted as a reserve force in a normal. If you're thinking about it as a really large army, keeping a force back in order to fill those gaps or in order to deal with a flanker that you didn't anticipate, that's like military 101. Do you see a lot of forces doing that, though? Do you see people having people back in reserve?
You know, it's hard to say because so much of my experience is Stygia.
Sure.
So much of my experience is the same kind of 40 people all told.
Right.
So a lot of us have a lot of the similar tricks, but
Sure.
out of town I see it a little less often.
Okay.
At least I think. Because at events, and admittedly at events, a lot of times you're not working with people you're used to working with.
Right.
So it's not as cohesive as it generally would be. But I'll see a lot more of like, well, that hole keeps being open. It's been open the last 4 fights. I should maybe fill that hole. It's kind of the nice thing of tactics on a game like this where you get up and do it again afterwards as opposed to you did.
Right.
You don't have to have that like, well, I figured out this tactic immediately. You can be like, okay, this isn't working.
Right.
Let's try it here.
A little redirection. Yeah, it's not like if you screw it up the first time, you don't get a second time.
Yeah,
like in real war.
There's so many second times.
And the other thing that I think also plays into this idea of hanging back a little bit, command and control is another thing that somebody hanging back can absolutely do. And as I'm doing more and more archery because of this nerve crap I got going on, I'm finding myself filling in this command and control more. A little bit of backstory on this. In high school, I was a drum major. So I did a lot of hollering at people to get them to follow orders in a simple way to do things. After I graduated from high school, I went into the Army, and during basic training, I was something called the Student First Sergeant for the entire cycle. That in of itself is fairly uncommon because it's a very high-stress position. It goes God, drill sergeants, you. And so that's a lot of responsibility, especially because you're also in basic training at the same time. But I loved it because it meant I got to holler at people and kind of direct them around. A slight megalomaniac streak.
Past tense, I'm sure.
Of course, I'm a totally enlightened being now. Nirvana shines out of my
Water coming out of my nose. So,
I was going to try not to swear on this one. I told you
I'm
not to
doing
swear.
better than you
did
so far. That is
good.
unusual.
You did so good. No, I swore first on the first one. I swore first on the second. I keep telling people not to swear because I want to do it first, apparently. But anyway, so when I was in basic training, I learned all these things. I like calling out orders. And honestly, one of the things I notice in Belagarth is once the fighting actually starts, once everybody's, tucked in and the blows start going, everybody kind of gets blinders. Nobody's necessarily paying attention to where the numbers are strong or the numbers are weak or where there might be an opportunity 50 yards downfield because they're focused on the fight right in front of them, right? They've got the task at hand that they're definitely more focused on than everything else. So having somebody who's stepped back a little bit, like an archer or somebody who has taken it upon themselves to do this, they're able to look and say, oh my gosh, we got more numbers than them right here, and if we crush this part of the opposing line, we can get a split all the way down and wrap this right up. And all it takes at that time is somebody behind going, get into them, boys! And that's me.
It's important to consider how you go about it, though. You can communicate well, or there are some people that just yell, push! Push! And it doesn't actually... No one knows who they are. There's no encouragement for them to listen. They're just screaming, push, push, why aren't you pushing? And it's not helpful.
No, I usually scream out something like, we got the numbers, pour it into them.
Positive reinforcements. Some simple but specific instruction. And if it if you can, do it in a way that they still have their own room to do something. If you just tell them to run,
Right.
people are like, oh god, I have to run, and it's all they can think about.
Right.
But, like, in my case, when I'm doing this, I'm like, oh, hey, Alistair, we're getting stomped over there. Can you hang out with Plug and help work on this? And I have given them, let's fill this gap, but still given them the room to do it themselves, as opposed to being like, I need you here, I need you doing this.
No, you hit on a very, very good point in any sort of military instruction, which is simplicity. KISS, keep it simple, stupid, was something we said a lot in the military. And the whole reason for that is when things are moving fast, when people are quote unquote dying all around you, when the proverbial poop has hit the proverbial fan. See, I caught myself there. It's hard. It can be hard to understand even what somebody's saying from behind you if you're trying to issue this long, drawn out statement. Something like, pour it into them, eyes right, move, move, move. These are things that anybody can really understand because you can say them repetitively.
Coming in on the left.
Short, simple, sweet. Stuff that people... it's the same thing with when people are picking their names. Sometimes people come in and they're like, I want to be Baron Bahamalama Shingity Bang Bang Fergity Walk Walk. And it's
we had a guy just this week that they finally picked their name, and we were all really excited. And he's like, it's Lidodrama or something like that, and like there's some silence, and he goes, it's Elvish, and we go, we're all going to call you Lid.
Yep. Because you can
Great.
say that in
Lid is a
camp.
good name, it works, you can have your full cool one, but don't pick this name unless you know that it will never once be Lidodrama behind you, it's Lid. Behind.
Oh yeah, nobody ever says my full name. Nobody ever says Yaga Malark, look behind you. It's either Yaga or Malark. Like, there's always one of the two.
I'm technically Sir Thiadric Thumbs. No one has ever once called me Thiadric Thumbs.
Because by the time they got through it, you'd be dead.
Whoops.
So that's another part about thinking the enemy. Having somebody behind doing command and control. Another huge part that we also just touched on was having a tiny bit of a plan before going in. Again, any specific plan isn't probably going to work, but an idea of saying, hey, shieldman, I want you to go stand with that archer and make sure they stay alive to kill people. That's an open-ended plan that they are free to carry out however they see fit, but that accomplishes a very, very critical task.
Yeah.
So, we're going to touch more on that a little bit later when we start talking about outthinking the paradigm. But this whole winning without fighting section in the book, The Art of War, finishes with Sun Tzu talking about avoiding a protracted siege. In Belagarth and Warhammer 40k, I know I haven't talked too much about 40k today. I'm sorry for the guys who are listening for that.
I don't play, so I would not be able to add.
You know, before we talk about the battle that we have selected today, I'm going to talk about the battle I had with my orcs,
Please
just for
do.
the 40k players. But this avoiding a protracted siege, most times in 40k you're not doing actual siege warfare, most times in Belagarth you're not doing actual siege warfare, but the analogy can stretch to apply to your opponent's heavily fortified zones. So if you're looking across the field and you see a spot where all of your team, the enemy team's best shieldmen are concentrated,
Yeah.
that's going to be a slog. It doesn't matter if you think you can get through it. It's going to be a slog. So trying to hit that straight on and having that be your main strategy isn't necessarily the best idea, because while you're slogging, they could potentially do some flanking or do something tricky to get behind you. So it's on you to do that instead.
If you're going to do that, you better have the, oh god, who was it? The Civil War big general Grant?
There were a lot of big generals in the Civil War. You have to be more specific.
The one that won by being in the north and being like, hey, I'm just going to throw 100,000 troops at you.
Yes,
and
Grant was the one who applied the theory of attrition to the Civil War.
Yeah, you better be able to have Grant numbers if you're going to punch a heavily fortified area straight on.
Translation, Imperial Guard numbers. But that illustrates the points. Why? And we already talked about this last time. Don't attack your opponent where they're strong. Attack them where they're weak, and feign strength where you are strong, or feign strength where you are weak, in order to distract them. This is the whole idea of winning without fighting, or winning before fighting, which is more applicable to what we're kind of talking about here. And all that, the fighting without winning, or
Fighting without... Oh, I'm really good at that. We could do a whole episode.
exact opposite of what this podcast is supposed to be about. But winning without fighting, that's more of an abstract idea. In the next section of the Art of War, Sun Tzu moves into talking about specific number ratios and what to do in those circumstances. And the same applies for the real battlefield as it does for Belagarth and for Warhammer 40k. Because Sun Tzu says that if you have them outnumbered 10 to 1, surround them. The idea here is that you're not sacrificing more life than you need to. If you're trying to engage them on a front, like an even front, they might be able to maneuver in such a way to inflict equitable losses upon you, which you don't want ever.
It's like we were saying earlier about hitting from 2 different angles. If you can hit from 4 different angles, that's even better.
That's even better. One of the practices, now you're a knight, so I'm going to poke fun at you a little bit here for a second. One of the practices of knights in Belagarth is when a fight is getting down toward the end and there's not that many people left on a side, if one of them happens to be a knight, the other knights and squires will line up and fight them one-on-one.
No. Some will.
Some will.
I'll do my best to hit them in the back while they're fighting someone else.
War masters and certain wise knights will hit them in the back while they're fighting someone else, because this idea of fighting anybody on even terms is exactly against the art of war. You never want it to be on even terms. You never want to pick a fair fight.
My squires laugh at me because every time they hear the words knightly virtues, they can hear me rolling my eyes. They can hear it. Like, not just see it, hear it.
Scratching the top of your eyelids. That's what that sound was supposed to be. It wasn't me dragging my cat across a washboard, I promise. Notice how he's been very quiet this episode, huh? The draconic policies are working. Beatings will continue until morale improves. No, he's locked in his room. But yeah, so if you've got the numbers, use the numbers, is what Sun Tzu is saying here. If I got them outnumbered 10 to 1, take your time, surround them and attack. Same thing in Warhammer 40k. A lot of time, and I have this problem because I play orcs. That's my one big melee army, is that I play orcs. And a lot of times I like to try to just get dug in with some Primaris Marines or with some Terminators, and it never goes well for me because orcs are supposed to be a number-based...
They're a swarm.
They're a swarm. They're a horde. Specifically speaking, they're a horde-based army, and so their whole point is to be able to overwhelm you with numbers. And so if I'm engaging my Marine opponent without having first consolidated my numbers and gotten them to such a point that I can just sheerly overwhelm my opponent, I'm not playing them correctly. It's the same thing in this particular case. Mm-hmm. At a 5 to 1, he says simply just attack, which is to say, press your advantage, move swiftly, and move in such a way that you are able to capitalize on whatever advantage speed might entail. Because the issue I find is that even though you have an advantage, that can turn into hubris, and hubris can be exploited. So that even if you have a 5 to 1 advantage, if your opponent knows how to play you right, and knows how to play those numbers right, any sort of slowness is going to be capitalized on, or at least it's wise to assume it will be. So, again, move quickly, do away with this outdated concept of knightly virtue, and just kill the opponent. Do you disagree, Sir?
No, not at all. People are like, you can't backstab me, I'm a knight. I'm like, well, you should have known better then.
You shouldn't have left your back open, yeah. All right, so the third scenario he talks about is the 2-on-1. And what he says in the book is to split your enemy. And the actual translation of the word that they use for split is up for debate as to what he actually means, because even as Thumbs and I were kind of talking about this before the episode, we came up with 2 different versions of the split in our minds. For me, the 2v1 is you hit your enemy hard like in the center, and you cause their forces to split, thereby giving you more numeric advantage one way or the other. But Thumbs had a different way of interpreting this passage.
The pincer. Split your group into 2, maybe 3 if you have enough, but 2 generally. 1 on the left, 1 on the right, punch.
It's a pretty time-honored tradition. The hammer, the anvil, the wolf, the crow, the left, the right. Yeah. It's easier than it sounds, and it's also far more effective than it sounds, especially, again, if you've got a 2 to 1 advantage, because then even if your opponent decides to really strongly go one direction or the other, you at least are even in that direction and not at a numeric disadvantage, which is what you're always trying to avoid in any sort of combat situation. And speaking of which, the next section he talks about is equal combat. And this is where you're going to have most Warhammer 40Ks take place with the equal, because even if you don't necessarily have the same numbers, the points add up to everybody being basically even. In Belagarth, we try to balance the teams.
Same skill level, roughly.
Same skill level. And there's even games like Stand and Deliver where players who are winning or like you'll be able to trade players back and forth and balance out the teams naturally. So this is actually where we often find ourselves in a neutral, which is to say at the beginning of the game in either Belagarth or Warhammer 40k. And here, Sun Tzu tells us to engage. And he doesn't really give a whole lot of detail in this particular section because I think the whole rest of the book is kind of what is supposed to kind of take place in this. But let's kind of extrapolate on it a little bit. If you've got these even sides, what are some tactics that you have noticed working consistently and when you've got even numbers and even skill level thereabout?
I mean, as I said, I really can't stand the line grind. It's not a reliable way of winning as far as I'm concerned unless you train specifically for it, and we've never cared for it.
Oktoberfest would be a very, very strange event for you.
I want to try it really bad, I'm not going to lie. Oktoberfest is the Eastern event that sounds really tempting.
It's coming up here soon, too.
I am not going this year.
I can't either, but it's one of my absolute favorites. I love Okfest. It's one of the ones where you get multiple hundreds of people on the field at the same time. It is amazing.
But the one thing you can do if you do get stuck in that is what we dubbed the Stygia Corner, because it was like 4 Stygians doing it at an event. But again, it's hitting them at slightly 2 different angles, because I will love that forever. The line goes, and then either the left side or the right side pushes around them a little bit. And then if you can make one part of the line crumble, you can just walk down the other direction.
It's like dominoes at that point.
Yeah. Because for everyone you kill, you suddenly have one more person that's able to follow up with you.
Well, that's some mathematic beauty right there. My AdMech brain absolutely adores that. Now, why do you think that people didn't get wise to it? You said that this worked for basically the entire event, right?
It kind of depends on how much you're used to it. Because it's punching open the side a little bit to get skirmishers in is really what it is.
Right.
So for a place like Stygia that's really skirmisher heavy, we were like, oh, wait, they're going to come around. But if people are used to the line grind, they're just going to punch against each other and just not... It takes them longer to figure it out.
So for you, gaining advantage in an even situation is about, again, applying those numbers in a specific way. Like you said, you stacked up on the one side and then use that momentum to roll down the length of the line.
Yeah.
Effectively changing the numbers. Even though the numbers were technically normal, you had a large numeric advantage in whatever 5x5 square you guys were fighting in.
Historically, in and out of Bell, like, there's all sorts of stories of Alexander the Great, who had roughly the same sides, but if he could punch a hole somewhere, they could split and break it.
Sure. Well, and that's a solid concept that has been touched upon all throughout military history.
That's just basically cavalry tactics. That's like all it is.
Comes back around with every technological innovation, too. Napoleon came up with the idea of bombarding with cannons one section of the line, of your opponent's line, and causing a catastrophic break there and then pushing it really hard with your forces. It's the same idea, new technology. This thing works in Bell and 40k as well. If you've got a lot of archers or if you've got a lot of long-range honor Gardoon crawlers, in my particular case, it's nice to be able to punch that hole, and then your opponent either has to do one of 2 things. They either have to spend some time fixing that hole and arresting their field mobility in doing so, or they neglect to fix that hole and leave themselves exposed to that being exploited upon. So yeah, anytime you've got even numbers, again, the whole point of this podcast, the whole point of war in general, and if you read Sun Tzu's book, if you read Miyamoto Musashi's book, The Book of Five Rings, if you read Niccolo Machiavelli's Art of War, one of my absolute favorite works, undervalued book.
I haven't read it. I have the audiobook. It's on my list.
It's like you would expect. They say, never, ever, ever engage in a fair fight. So the next scenario that Sun Tzu talks about is when you're slightly outnumbered. He doesn't give an exact numeric ratio here, but you can imagine that it's either that 1 to 2 or 1 to 5 idea that you're slightly outnumbered. And in this particular case, he says, be careful and evade your enemy's advances. Evade your enemy's advances. So that's to say that when your enemy is pushing out really strong, do not sit there and let yourself be engaged at that point, because all the enemy has to do is hit you there, fix you there, and then move around the sides because, again, they've got numbers.
Nomadic horse archers did it for literally thousands of years.
The barbarians of Rome were eventually beaten by the Goths and the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths and the New Wave Goths. No, not those guys. But all of them coming in and doing a similar idea, this hit and run tactic. We were talking about a little bit earlier when we were talking about the Urukai and the DGMA, how when we first started out, we were numerically small and also had less of the veterans on the field. So we didn't necessarily have a numbers or a skill advantage at the time. And so what we had to do was maneuver our enemies against one another and choose to engage our enemy when they were not fully acquitted to do so.
Yeah.
You know, when they were busy looking for arrows or when they were distracted with something else, those are the moments to engage because, again, you're not looking for a fair fight. You can lose a fair fight. You always want to put the numbers in your advantage. It's the same thing in Warhammer 40k. Anytime you're building an army or anytime you're playing a match, you're trying to do so in such a way that capitalizes on what that army is trying to do. Again, with AdMech, if you're not playing a long-range shooting game, you should probably switch to a different army because that's what we're set up to do. I mean, we have other elements to the army that can be used, like the Castellan robots being able to go in and punch, and some of the other nice melee units having their niche. But overall, you got to use it what it's for. So with the DGMA, we weren't a front-fighting force. We weren't this line thing, and so we developed these more backhanded, more what we call the crazy mountain mine skirmisher style. This still kind of exists here today. And this last one, this isn't really an option for us all that much in Bell or in 40k, but when you are heavily outnumbered, and this is to say probably the 1 to 10 kind of category, Sun Tzu says just withdraw. Just don't even fight. And sometimes you can do this on the Belagarth field. I know that there's been times, especially as an archer, where I look around and I'm like, all right, it's me, a handful of ragtag injured fighters, and a whole lot of enemy who are looking to beat me down because I've been shooting their friends in the face for the past 15 minutes. Hand on the head, I am dead. I just withdrawed. Goodbye.
Generally, the only time you're going to be this outnumbered is if you go to an event where you don't have either unit members or realm members with you.
Right.
If it's pretty much just you, and you don't know anyone else, you're like, well...
And normally you wouldn't be able to expect a victory out of a situation like this, but occasionally a miracle does strike. And anybody who knows the name Toto will know that one man can make a difference on the field. This is a man who has won a unit battle by himself at Chaos Wars.
You've almost done that, haven't you?
Not nearly with as much style.
Oh, fair enough.
But he does it consistently. Here on the Stygian field, he became well known for it. Everybody was trying to recruit this guy, and he was the master at being able to win with just his one dude. And the way he does it, I'm going to out some of your secrets here, Toto, so you can come beat me up if you like. But it's in his body stance. He's a big guy, right? If you never have met Toto, you know his arms are about as big around as your head. So it's not like he's not noticeable. But what he does is if he's like the lay on is called, he'll just stand there with his sword down kind of by his side, and he's got his shield in a kind of a resting position. He's not meeting anybody's eye. He's not advancing toward anybody. He's not really running away from anybody either. He just is sort of there. And then he just sort of fades from your perception. And then at the end, when you think that you've won and you've tidied up the field, you suddenly turn around and there's Toto.
Sir Eton I think he's in Wrath, Eton,
yep,
does that too. It was a lot of fun when I was running the field at Chaos because I got to watch people fight that I don't usually get to watch fight because I was heralding all the time.
Right.
And he would not even be holding his shield. He would just have it leaning in front of him, like against his legs. And the fight would go on, and I'd hear people be like, oh, that's Eton, he's cool. And then he sometimes would kill some of them, and then just like walk away again, and people would let him. And it was entirely just, I am non-aggressive, and you're like, oh, I just don't want to deal with that.
Right. Well, again, he's not aggressive. He's not a threat that you have to deal with immediately because he's not aggressing. He's not running away, so it doesn't trigger that instinct to chase. They're just sort of there. And if they have a reputation, like you say, for being somebody who's not a huge backstabber and is going to let you pass by without incident, and they're a good fighter to begin with, why take the chance?
Do the math. It's not worth it.
Right. I mean, even if you just lose a couple of limbs from people, those are limbs that could have been used to fight somebody else. So, again, in the heavily outnumbered section, it is not common to end up winning, but in the rare cases of Eton and Toto, some people have turned it into a bit of an art form.
Generally, you want, if it's just you versus everyone else, then you're done. Right. But if it's you versus them versus them versus them, you can have a chance.
Right. You can absolutely play that to your advantage. And again, when you have multiple teams on the field, when it's not just two teams, it works a lot better because you've got a lot more dynamics going on. There's more push and pull, a lot more targets to be aware of in those particular cases. But yeah, so we're going to move on from the subject of numbers, which is a little dry, to something that's a bit more esoteric again, and these are the 5 keys to victory. So those 5 keys that he's talking about, we're going to kind of go through them and talk about what they mean for Bell and for Warhammer 40k, if they apply. The first one is knowing when to fight and when not to fight. And this kind of seems self-explanatory, but everything else we've been kind of talking about in this episode lends toward this idea, right? And the sort of idea that if you've got different numeric situations, you're going to fight at different times in different places than if you've got a better or a worse numeric situation.
With the Chaos Field, when I was talking about earlier, we could fight God Squad, or we could fight EBF together and then deal with each other. It was a definite when to fight, when not to fight.
Absolutely. So, and that's, again, one of those large field, especially unit battles where you've got multiple units out there, if you're one of the first units into the fray, you're depleting your numbers right off the bat. So unless you're going into somebody who you know you're going to be able to take really easily, like a 10-to-1 kind of situation, it's probably best to wait a second and see how the field evolves and see where the best place to maneuver is going to be. Because again, getting caught out in the open or getting caught in the middle, God forbid, it is the worst place to be. So knowing when to fight and when not to fight is absolutely important in Belagarth. And it's the same thing in Warhammer 40k. Like I was saying earlier, if I've got 3 squads of boys running at 1 squad of Space Marines, is it smarter for me to hit that squad with the Marines with just 1 squad, or to wait until I've got all 3 squads to bring to bear? Well, it depends on the situation. It depends if I've got cover. It depends if the Marines are distracted by something else. There's a lot of factors that kind of come into play there. So that needs to be read every single time. There's no hard and fast rule for any of this. It's all just getting in the habit of thinking about it. And that helps you know when to fight and when not to. The next part of this is what we were just talking about, knowing what to do with superior forces and with inferior forces. Mm-hmm. So again, if you've got the numbers, knowing how to make those count and not lose too many people and deplete your actual advantage. But if you've got less people, knowing how to maneuver those in such a way that you can place yourself in an advantageous situation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess there's not enough.
I'm sorry, I don't have a ton to add here. Yes, this makes sense.
This part is a lot of just a recap of a lot of the things we've talked about. This next part is kind of new as to what we've been talking about today. Holding officers and men or soldiers in united purpose. So obviously, in terms of a real army, knowing why you're fighting is a big deal. If you're just marching into somebody else's country and killing people and you don't know why, most people aren't inclined to do that.
No.
Most people are peaceful and will never kill anybody in their entire life. You have to have a reason to kill somebody. So if you're told that they're a barbarian, if you're told that they're an infidel, if you're told that, hell, if you just want their land.
Yeah, they have stuff we want, has actually been the main reason for large parts of history.
Most of war has been resource-based. Even like the Crusades. It's funny if you look back at the Crusades and it's like, the Crusades were a religious war. And it's like, well, they actually weren't. It was a political war because the European kingdoms were about to be at each other's throats again. The papacy was like, we can't take another massive European war. Oh, look, brown people.
Oh, God.
And that's just
super accurate.
But that's been like the anthem of the West for the last 500 years at this point.
1,000 maybe.
But again, it kind of worked in that situation. So in a real army, you have to have a reason for going in and killing people. In Belagarth, you're not. There's no such thing as conscription. There's no such thing.
The reason is you're here because you want to be here.
You want to be here, and so if you're in a part of a unit, chances are you're there because you wanted to be a part of the unit. So what makes people want to be a part of a unit? What makes a unit work? Well, that's being a part of a united purpose. I know that for us, the Dark Angels, our united purpose is not just having a strong field presence, which is really important to us, but also taking care of one another, really exemplifying what people say when they think of a family outside of a family. Like, those are really big things for being a Dark Angel. So if you're just a good fighter, but you're kind of a not great person, we're not going to be looking at you, because we're looking at people that we're going to trust our kids around. We're old at this point. Most of the Dark Angels are above 30 at this point. So most of us have kids or want to bring our younger cousins or siblings to these things. And so we don't want to be partying with somebody who is sketchy.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So that's a huge part of our united purpose.
That's a big thing in Gelf Camp, since it's such a public hangout area. We have to make sure it's not a creepy public hangout area.
It needs to be a safe place for people. Sure.
Yeah.
Because that's a huge part of your draw.
With new units, when people are like, oh, well, I'd like to start a new unit, what do you think? I'm like, first thing you need is a theme.
Right.
It can be, we're monsters, we're church knights, we're big fighters, we're big partiers. It doesn't matter what your theme is. You need a reason for people to be there.
What's your byword, or what's your catchphrase?
Yeah.
So to speak. And yeah, that's absolutely huge. And this one doesn't so much apply to Warhammer 40K, I don't think, because again, you're the one in charge, so you're kind of running things. I suppose if you're running a guard army, having commissars is a great way to keep people in line. Same thing with orcs. You got your break-in eds to keep your boys from running, but it doesn't. There's also teams. I'm not a part of a huge team yet, or that's presumptuous of me to say yet. I'm not a part of a huge team in Warhammer 40K, but there are teams, and they follow along these same lines. They'll do things around the idea of themes. They'll do things around the idea of filling specific roles or specific slots on the team, but the team itself has a purpose. Mm-hmm. The team itself has an idea of what it's going for, like we were just talking about with the units. And so this is important for keeping people organized on the field, too, because if you are of one mind and one spirit as the person who's standing next to you, because the night before you had a really deep conversation around the fireplace, and now you actually want to protect that person. Now they mean something to you. Mm-hmm. If you've got a super divisive camp life, and people aren't liking each other and they're not vibing, they're not going to vibe on the field either. Yeah, he just made an explosion.
Oh, sorry.
Cool explosion with his hands. But yeah, no, it's waiting to fall apart. It's waiting to implode.
Yeah.
So holding officers, which is to say your leaders, and the people in united purpose, everybody's on the same page. This is a key to victory.
For something like Belagarth, or I'm assuming Warhammer 40K, since it's a hobby as opposed to a life or death situation.
Sure.
One thing I've noticed as having run several things now is if you can keep a relaxed attitude as a leader, as you can be aware that like this is a hobby, it's going to work much better than, say, a drill sergeant in a lot of cases.
There's a time and a place for the drill sergeant, and it's on the field.
Yeah.
Nobody wants a drill sergeant in camp because they're on vacation. You know, nobody wants to be being screamed at in camp. Again, on the field, you need to be able to be heard over the din of battle and over the sound of the weapons and all that. So a little bit of the harsh voice, the drill sergeant voice comes out. But, you know, you're absolutely right. The best leaders in Belagarth attract with honey, not vinegar. It just works well everywhere. But especially in a place where, again, people don't have to be there. They're not being paid to be there. It's not like a job.
They're being there because they want to be there.
Right. So that's huge. Holding people together, one of the keys to victory. Careful preparation to catch the enemy unprepared would be the fourth key to victory. So in this, the careful preparation comes in a couple of different ways. The first one is physical. I notice a huge difference in Belagarth between the people who practice off-field and people who just practice at Sunday practice.
I'm super guilty of the second one for the most part.
Which is to say that you are the exception that proves it.
No, it shows, trust me.
Because most of the good fighters I know, most of the great fighters I know, have some sort of home workout routine. They do a shot form, either with a Appel or with shadow boxing, which is to say just doing the forms without a resistance. They have a workout routine of some sort. A lot of them will adopt some sort of eating regimen, even to make sure that they're on their top physical fitness.
They're being athletes.
They're being athletes.
Really what it is.
Absolutely. So that's a way to be prepared, because most of the people coming into this aren't. Most people coming into this are especially new people, are usually thinking it's a LARP. They're not thinking it's going to be sports swords.
Or they'll come in being like, oh, it's a nerd game, I'll do great, and then go, oh, no.
I get that all the time with the high schoolers. Like, we'll have jocks coming by, people who are on, like, the football or the basketball team, and they'll be like, oh, I'm going to give this a try, turn to their friends, ha ha ha, look at these nerds. And then they come out for 5 minutes and they're like, whoa, I got a thing that I got to get to.
You know, and I'll give them credit if for some reason I suddenly was playing football with them, I would have the exact same, like,
Dude,
God,
yeah.
no, but...
Yeah, if one of those guys decided to tackle me in the hallway, that'd be done, man. That would be the rest of my day.
I had a new guy once that was getting really mad at me. Mm-hmm. Like, why can't I beat you? And I'm like, okay, so first of all, you're 18. I've been playing this game since you were 3 years old.
Right.
Experience.
Longevity.
And like, second of all, I've been doing this forever. What's something else you play? And he said baseball. And I said, man, if I tried to play baseball with you, I would have no chance whatsoever. Right. I wouldn't even know what was happening.
Right.
The same thing is happening here.
Yep. No, and that's exactly it. So, so that preparation, that's really to give vets an advantage over vets, because even just being in the sport for a long time, even just learning what shots work and what shots don't, even just failing 10,000 times and doing no real training outside of it, we are learning creatures. We will eventually learn how to fight just through process of trial and error. That coming to it super prepared, that gives an advantage of vets over other vets. Okay, you know the same shots I do, you know the same thing about foot placement that I do, but I do 30 minutes of cardio a day.
Yeah.
Which means that at the end of the... that's not an actual I don't do 30 minutes of cardio a
I
day,
work an 8-hour shift moving boxes for the day and then get to practice, and I'm just like, oh my God, I'm going to die.
But that's you. Like, you don't work a desk job, though. Like, you're still moving boxes and stuff. You still have a very physical job.
Yeah, it's true. I do move about 3,000 pounds a day.
Yeah, so you're going to have a little bit of an advantage. And even if it's just a hair, even if it's just a half a second, that's enough to win sometimes. Mm-hmm. So that physical fitness is a huge part of coming prepared and catching your enemy unprepared. Another thing is the research. Looking up sword forms, looking up how people did it in the past. This is one of my favorite ways, is to go back, look at ancient battles, and look at ancient fighting techniques and say, okay, headshots excluded, how can I apply this to Belagarth? Because let's be honest, about 50% of every sword fighting form is headshot, sideways headshot, other sideways headshot, diagonal headshot.
That's why kendo people have such a really steep learning curve early on. Of like, please stop doing this.
You always know them too. They whack you right in the middle of the forehead. It's beautiful, right on that bony ridge. It's
perfect
boom.
shot.
It's like, well, sorry, bud. That would have nailed me, but we don't do that here.
And now I'm kind of mad at you because I wasn't expecting a headshot.
That's right. But so doing that research and treating it like a martial art and researching it and practicing it like a martial art, that gives you an edge over other people. Studying your opposition gives you an advantage over other people. One of my favorite things to do, and one of the things I do before every fight that I go to, whether it's a national event or just a home practice, is I'll sit on the side of the field and just watch everybody else sparring, warming up, even doing their opening games. And I'm watching to see who's on point today, who is moving a little slow, maybe a little hungover, who is more distracted with their girlfriend or boyfriend on the side of the field. Like, all these things kind of play into somebody's headspace and somebody's field presence and how they're going to perform. And then watching what kind of shots they like to throw, what foot they favor. All these things can lead to a greater abundance of knowledge, especially if your opponent doesn't know those things about you. If I've been watching somebody, a stranger, warm up, and then I spar against them, and they don't know me from Adam, I'm going to have just a little bit of an advantage in that particular way. Again, if they're an amazing fighter and I'm a doofus, there's only so much an uninitiated person can do with knowledge. But if you know what to do with the knowledge, it can be very effective.
Oh, yeah.
And then also knowing units, knowing how a unit typically fights, whether they're a high mobility unit, a shield wall kind of unit, a little bit of both. Those things can help you in fighting not only the unit itself, but the individual members of said unit, because as we said, units are a little typecast. They tend to look for a similar kind of personality, a similar kind of person to be in there. So yeah, the preparation can be huge, and knowledge is a huge part of that preparation. The final key to victory that Sun Tzu mentions is a skillful general given free rein by the ruler, which is to say that you don't have a ruler who's sitting there micromanaging from a civilian perspective what the general is doing militarily. And this is because a civilian doesn't necessarily understand the nuances of a military strategy, doesn't necessarily understand when to attack, when to retreat, when to feign either of those things. And so what Sun Tzu is saying here is that you need to be that the general needs to be in charge. What I think the metaphor that we can apply for Belagarth and 40K is that you need to be there in that moment. Whatever you need to do, whatever pre-battle or pre-match ritual gets you there. For me, it's music. I'll put on Finn Troll or don't judge me, K-pop, and it'll motivate me to and get my blood up.
Yep,
And
I used to listen all the time.
Yep.
While walking to work, I would or not walking to work, walking to practice, would put on my iPod and whatever peppy song got my blood moving.
And that gives you, and then when you're there at the field, I typically will just put my phone, unless there's some sort of family emergency that might happen, or some reason that I need to be in touch with people, I'll typically just turn my phone off. And I'm not even paying attention to the outside world, because if your mind is full of quote unquote civilian obligations, if you're thinking about all that other stuff, your mind isn't there. You're not the skillful general being given free rein. You're a skillful general who is being yoked by the state mentally, and your mind is elsewhere. So don't think about that stuff. Don't think about real life. Let's just use that as a comparison for the state. Don't think about that. You got to think about the battle. You got to think about the war.
Yeah, worry about groceries afterwards.
That's right. Worry about the groceries or who's doing dishes afterwards. So the 5 keys to victory: knowing when to fight and when not to, knowing what to do with superior and inferior numbers, holding officers and men in united purpose, careful preparation to catch the enemy unprepared, and a skillful general given free rein by the ruler. These are the 5 keys to victory. So the battle that I want to use to kind of illustrate these principles today is the Battle of Red Cliff. A lot of you guys might know that from the romancing... Oh my gosh, I forgot the rest of it, what it's called. It's about the Three Kingdoms period in China. And
Romance era or something like that?
No, there was an actual novel that was written about it, like Romancing the Stone or Romancing the Ring or something like that, that dealt specifically with this. A game I play, Dynasty Warriors, is kind of based off that book series, but I've never actually read it, obviously. But I have done research on my absolute favorite general in probably the history. I've talked to him before on the show, Zhuge Liang.
Oh, I have heard you mention it.
I love this guy. He's the like, if you're thinking about outthinking the enemy, if you want to win without fighting, you gotta study Zhuge Liang, because the guy was just amazing at coming up with these strategies that turned the tides in his favor completely. And the Battle of Red Cliff is a good example of this. So, Thumbs is coming into this without knowing anything. I tried to give him a lecture on the Battle of Red Cliff before the episode. He said, no, we'll save it for the episode, because he doesn't know much about this particular battle, so he can learn about it with y'all.
I figured I could ask questions a little better this way.
So, before I go into the battle, are there any framing questions you'd like to ask?
Where roughly in history is this? I know you said ancient China, but...
So we're talking about the Three Kingdoms period, which is, I think, roughly 500 to 300 BC.
Okay, so Persia, Greece era.
Yep.
Never coming close to meeting each other, but...
Well, actually,
Persia.
no, they were. They were, like, all these cultures were far more in contact than we think they were.
That's true.
Like, for instance, one of the best examples of this is they found Phoenician artifacts in northern Britain. The Phoenicians before that,
that's a little bit of a distance.
They were like, this is a Mediterranean culture, and then they were like, whoa, they've got these in northern Britain. So that means one of either two things. That means either the Phoenicians were trading themselves as far north as northern Britain, or their goods were being traded along trade routes to northern Britain, which is about the same thing when you're talking about cultural influences.
They found lapis lazuli in ancient Britain too,
Yep.
which is 3,000 years ago. Holy
And
Jesus!
And lapis lazuli, if for those of you who don't know, that's an India thing that grows or is found in India.
Yeah, it was from. They think they traced it to like a mine in Afghanistan.
Yep.
It was so cool.
Sorry,
Anyways,
Afghanistan.
to the
Yep.
point of what we're talking about, they at very least had very little interaction with each other.
Right. But, so we're talking ancient China, Three Kingdoms period. So anybody who's familiar with the Dynasty Warriors or Romancing series, This would have been the period of time when you had the three states, Wei, Shu, and Wu in China.
Is this still Iron Age, Bronze Age?
I definitely iron.
It must be.
Yeah. Because they had some very advanced weaponry at that time. At least.
Cool. Sorry, I don't know China very well.
I love China. One of my favorite fields of study. So this occurred, and this was a battle that took place between the northern state of Wei and the south, kind of western state of Shu, and Zhuge Liang was an advisor to the Lord of Shu, but he basically ran the military operations of the time. Wei was a lot bigger. Like Xiao Xiao, the commander who had made Wei what it was, had been campaigning for years at this point, had eaten up large swaths of territory, and was now gunning for the south. The combined forces of Wu and Shu were worried because neither of them individually could oppose the forces of Wei. The really important thing was to keep them from crossing the river. There was a large river that ran through the middle of this section. I'm fairly certain it was the Yangtze. I might have to correct myself next episode if I'm wrong. But anybody who knows anything about the rivers in that area, they are massive, and they take quite a bit of effort to cross. This isn't a simple fording like we get here in the West. Mm-hmm. We're talking mountain-moving rivers. So they had to get across that first. So, there was the cat is freaking out over here. He, in true form, he has to interrupt my episode. But backtracking a little bit. So Zhuge Liang knew they couldn't do a front-on assault. This was a situation where they were either heavily or slightly outnumbered, so they had to play their odds a little bit more differently. They also were lacking on raw materials. They had been fighting for a fairly long time at this point, and Wei just had way more in terms of the materials to make war. So before this Battle of Red Cliff, Zhuge Liang is credited with doing something truly brilliant. What he did was he got a bunch of boats and stuffed them full of straw, and then manned them with men stuffed with straw. So you had a bunch of scarecrows on a straw boat.
Giant decoy fleet.
But for a specific purpose. He sailed these across the river, straight at the Wei forces. There was a heavy fog at the particular time, and he had his men on the other side of the river bang their drums. So they started playing their war horns and playing their war drums, started shouting out orders and all this, and all the people on the other side see are these ships coming looming out of the mist at them. So, as is typical tactical fashion at the time, the archers line up and open fire, and tens of thousands of arrows come flying into the air and strike these vessels, which then turn around and take their arrows right back to the other side of the river.
Oh, he was stealing their arrows?
Oh
my God,
arrows.
That's so much. I thought they were just making them waste it, but this is so much better.
So they get those arrows. So they've got tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of arrows at this point that they now have just harvested from Wei. And Wei is getting aggravated at this point, but the troops of Wei were they were plentiful, but they were malnourished, and they were exhausted from the long marches that they were having to go on for the length of this campaign that Xiao Xiao was running. And so one of the things they did was they lashed the boats together. And there's a couple of different mythological things that are credited for this. There's a myth or a story that one of the Shu generals went over and delivered some highly potent liquor to the enemy troops, got them super, super drunk, and then that made them queasy on the boats the next day, which had them lash it together. There were also storms at that time that would have made it smarter to lash boats together so that they get more across. There were a lot of reasons for doing this. What they didn't expect was the fire attack. I love it. Isn't that just, you just say fire attack, and you're like, oh. So what happened? They're coming across with their lashed boats, and one of the Wu generals had decided to defect, air quotes. Mm-hmm. He made this big show about getting beat up by one of the generals by saying around one of the spies, "I can't take it no more.
Oh, they're disrespecting me. Blah 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 blah.
I'm going to go over to Xiao Xiao. He knows how to treat his soldiers." And so he was one of the first ones to leave the banks and was going over with his fleet of ships that were packed full of kindling and oil, and sailed right into Xiao Xiao's fleet, and boom.
Yeah.
And then fire arrows coming on top of that. So the
In the Age of Wooden Ships, fire is about the most useful thing you could ever do.
Exactly. So this was a brilliant attack, using the enemy's own weapons against them, which I think
because it's their arrows.
It's their arrows, and it's something that it crippled Xiao Xiao's ability to continue that campaign. Was the big thing about this battle? It wasn't about destroying the forces of Xiao Xiao. It wasn't about invading Wei. It was about stopping Xiao Xiao's ability to continue his campaign in the south, which they did. With his fleet effectively destroyed after this attack, Xiao Xiao had no other recourse than to return to what he was doing and suspend his campaign, which allowed Shu and Wu to get more powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the Spark Notes version of the Battle of Red Cliff. There's been movies made about it, books written about it. It's one of Zhuge Liang's absolute best moments as a commander.
I can see how it'd be pretty famous. It's got all the good moments for a legend.
Oh, yeah. Nice little twist, a little bit of betrayal, the good stuff. Do you have any questions about it? I know I just sort of blew through it.
So I guess kind of what happened after. How did Zhuge Liang end up doing? I don't know anything about him.
Well, obviously, Zhuge Liang ended up dying. The Three States period continued for actually a fairly long time in a fairly stable fashion. Shu, which is who Zhuge Liang worked for, expanded their territory and became fairly successful. Mm-hmm. Of course, there was a lot of backstabbing and all over the place, but eventually things kind of settled down and a relative peace returned. The immediate aftermath of this battle saw Xiao Xiao's forces routed. There was a force deposited on that side of the river that when Xiao Xiao tried to reposition, he ran right into an ambush.
Oh, yeah.
And so there was a twofold. There was the Navy hit and then the Army hit. That really just crippled his ability to make war on the scale that he needed to.
Yeah, back then, one good loss would end the entire war for you.
Oh yeah, I mean, even now it can.
That's true.
I mean, in the Civil War, it happened too. Li won time after time after time after time after time, but he lost the war because he just didn't have the numbers to continue through with the campaign that he needed to do. So the Battle of Red Cliff, I think, really illustrates this idea of outthinking the enemy. By feigning an attack the first time, getting the enemy to waste arrows, gaining arrows, and then using a fake defection to start this fire attack, Zhuge Liang thought circles around. Now, Xiao Xiao wasn't a pushover. He was a great general in his own right, a very good tactician in his own right. So the fact that Zhuge Liang could kind of maneuver him into this position speaks to Zhuge Liang's own mastery of the battlefield.
Oh, yeah.
And he absolutely knew when to fight and when not to, when to use those superior numbers and when to use those inferior numbers. He held his officers and his men in a united position. They all knew what they were up to. The careful preparation, and they caught their enemy unprepared, and then he was given free rein by Liu Bei to do what he needed to do to win that war. You had all those factors right in place, right there.
Just walked through because of it.
Yep. So, in this same idea, I want to use my recent Warhammer 40k game. I just kind of use that as an example as well for something. I recently went against my friend Kaji, my apprentice Kaji, and he was using a combination of Imperial Guard. He was doing Catechans, for anybody who's interested, and Grey Knights. About even numbers of points of both. I was using Orcs. And my Orc force constituted, the way it looked on the board first round, I had 4 models. Any Orc player is going to be shaking their heads right now and be like, wait a minute.
That's not possible.
You had 4 models and you were playing a 2,000-point Orc army. How is that possible? I had 1 Stompa. Oh, I'm sorry. I had 5 models because I had 4 trucks. So 1 Stompa with a bunch of dudes inside. And then 4 trucks with a bunch of dudes inside.
Yeah.
And some Def Coptas in Deep Strike. And so my whole plan was just a complete blitz, hit him where he was weak, and exploit those and get as many points as I could early on. And that's exactly what I did. If anybody's ever played a Stompa, they know the sheer destructive power of the one good gun in the Orc army, the Def Cannon. I was popping his Lehman Russes left and right. And so his heavy firepower, I got first turn for anybody who going first is pretty big because it means you get to shoot first. And so I was able to take down one of his big tanks first round. And then I took down a tank every single round after that with my Stompa. By the time his Grey Knights hit the field and were able to be effective, I had effectively decimated his entire guard force. So that was his 3 tanks, the 1 Basilisk, and then the several forces of infantry that he had to protect them. Now, when his Grey Knights hit the field, deep striking at the end of turn 2, that was a game changer. After my Stompa died, I didn't have anything that could touch those Grey Knights. The Grey Knights, for anybody who hasn't necessarily played against them, they do a lot of Terminators, and their Paladins, which are Terminators, have 3 wounds instead of just 2, and they are all Psychers. Every Grey Knight is a Psyker, so you have this entire army of battle wizards dropping in and out of space, and my orcs are they're just not on that level. And so I changed my tactics. So at first, when I knew that I could overpower the guard, I came in strong. I came in shooting. I poured over him with all of my boys. But once those Grey Knights hit the field, I hightailed it out of there. I knew that I was not going to be in a position to win if I continued my attack. So I changed my idea. I went into the backfield and I held objectives because he was slow and couldn't catch me. Because I still had my Def Coptas and all my trucks at this point. So I pulled them out. And I just held objectives and ran circles around him until the end of the game.
Yeah.
If I had just gone in and fought him,
you would have lost.
I likely would have lost. And so what I did throughout this entire thing was when I had the 5-1 advantage, I absolutely attacked. Once I got heavily outnumbered, especially heavily outskilled, I withdrew completely and kind of let him exhaust himself.
Kind of floundered around.
Because he didn't have the ability to come and get... Like, he could teleport. Like, he had a psychic ability that allowed him to teleport and come after me. But he could only do it once. And there's no guarantee he'd get his charge.
Yeah.
Because it's a 9-inch charge. It's a long charge. So, by doing this, I was able to kind of manipulate the battlefield at different times in order to secure my victory. It was kind of the idea there. And that goes toward, we want to do a little bit of a chat now on some of these ideas. And one of the things I want to talk to you about, Thumbs, is outthinking the paradigm. Outthinking the way that things are done. Because people practice things in a certain way, and even right now there are certain trends in Belagarth that have established themselves as the main trends, the main things to do, the main shots to throw. But outthinking the paradigm means thinking ahead of that.
It's why I recommend to so many, because we're so remote here, it's super easy to have trouble getting people to go to bigger events, but it's why I'm like, you still need to do this because you need to learn other stuff than what we're teaching you.
Right. And the more you travel, the more you see of other people, the more you see how they fight, the more, not only can you learn how they fight, but you can learn how to fight against it. I'll say that I was not nearly as good at fighting against lines or fighting in a line before I went and lived in Tennessee for a year.
Yeah, I hated spears, so I got one.
Yep.
And it is actually now my favorite weapon, but... I
feel the same way about reds, even though I can't use them. But they're like my favorite weapon that I swore that I would never end up getting good with. But I'm thinking the paradigm also works in field tactics, too. If you're noticing that everybody is relying on heavily mobile tactics, then maybe focusing on tactics that capitalize on that, so that draw a heavily mobile force. Pin them, take away their mobility, or draw them out, which is to say that, like, if you can make your enemy chase you and get distant from one another. There was a Rurouni Kenshin episode, actually, that made me think
I haven't thought about that show in years.
But there's that episode where he's got that whole group of guys against him. There's like 10 dudes coming after this one swordsman. And what he does is he just sprints away. And the guardsmen, because they all have different speeds at which they run, kind of spread out as they're running. Mm-hmm. So all he has to do is wait for one of them to get ahead of the pack, turn around, defeat that dude, and then start running again, rinse and repeat.
Yeah, if I'm 1 versus 5, 6 people, we talked about this a little bit, I am never just engaging. I'm trying to hold, and eventually someone will make a mistake, and they'll step too far out, and I can leg them or arm them or do something, and yeah.
Or, if you're going against a unit that you know uses a lot of flanking, that's like their main thing, then perhaps redistributing your own people so that when you present your counterflank, you actually are making them get into a line fight. Because if there's one thing skirmishers hate, like you've been saying...
We really hate line fights.
So if you're a line fighter, try to force that line fight. See where those those skirmishers are going and try to intercept them so that they have to come through you, and you force that line fight, and suddenly you're on your terms. Mm-hmm. Outthinking the paradigm. The other thing I kind of want to touch on is we've talked a lot about preparation and outthinking the enemy and this winning without fighting and how that's all based in knowledge. All the preparation in the world cannot actually account for the chaos of battle. Real battle is absolute madness, but even fake battle, even play battle, you never actually know what your opponent is going to do. You can have a pretty good idea. You can run the numbers, you can have some statistics in your head.
But they're still people. People do the weirdest crap.
They can do something you don't expect.
Stuff.
It's the same thing in 40K. You might really think you know how that Eldar army is going to work, and they might surprise you with something that you weren't expecting. And so what I want to talk about real quick is the limits of preparation, or something I call the MacArthur principle. MacArthur said once that every plan is perfect until it meets the enemy. I think that is absolutely true. And one of the reasons that I think that KISS is so important. You got to keep it simple. You got to make sure that any orders that are given are clearly understood and have room for flexibility, because no plan is going to survive encounter with the enemy, no matter how perfect the plan is.
Yeah, we'll sometimes have newer people come up and be like, well, why didn't you do this thing you said you were going to do? I'm like, well, I meant to stab that guy, but then 3 other people came running up on me, so I kind of had to adapt.
Right. You couldn't follow through with the exact plan because it wouldn't. The situation changed, and that happens all throughout battle. So having some form of flexibility, having an idea for contingencies, these are absolutely important too.
Code words are nice.
Code words are nice. Even just simple battle cant that everybody is familiar with.
Same thing.
Move, fall back.
Form up on.
Yep.
Whoever.
You're getting hit, like any of those simple things that really, as long as your team is practicing together, and this is one of the reasons why I like fighting with Stygians when we go to other places. I wouldn't say that we practice necessarily like drills or anything as a realm, but because we fight with each other almost exclusively, and we're always switching teams back and forth during the
normal I know
fighting.
what you're gonna do. I can guess with roughly any Stygian. That guy from Idaho, I'm sure you're lovely, I'm sure you're great, but I don't know what to do with you.
Right, you haven't been watching them for the last 15 years.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where that familiarity brings with it the ability to do those contingencies. If somebody is standing near me and they know that I'm the type that if I see the numbers against me on a side that I'm going to start running, that means if I start running, you should probably start running too, because that side is lost. I don't just abandon a position because it's convenient for me. I abandon a position because there's no point in me being there anymore.
Yeah.
So that would be something that you, as somebody who knows me, would know. I would know about you that when you're pushing really heavy in a place, you're expecting support. And if you have support, you're going to be able to do a lot of damage with whatever you're doing. Mm-hmm. So it's best for me to support you when I see you doing exactly what I know that you're going to end up doing there.
And that's why I like that you're arching these days, because both of our things can still work.
That's right. You can still read people, but so make sure that if you're the planning type, because when I first started this, I enjoyed really, really complex plans. I enjoyed getting people together in a specific formation, because we used to drill at Gladiators.
We're gonna do an arrowhead formation, and then this side will swing out, and this guys will do this way, and everything will work perfectly. And it actually kind of worked. But the biggest problem with those kind of plans are this is a hobby. Right.
Well, and the other issue was that I couldn't always predict what the enemy was going to do. Again, the Gladiators did amazingly against the Uruk-hai because of that organization. But the other part of it was once the Uruk-hai and other teams started to figure out that the Gladiators were a fixed entity, that they were only reacting to orders, they began doing things that couldn't be anticipated quickly.
Wug has been doing a really good job lately of taking all the new people and giving them very specific instructions, because he's a spearman mostly, and getting a couple of people with shields and telling them what he needs them to do, and it's great, and they're doing really well. It's wonderful to watch. But I also know if I can kill Wug, the rest of the group will fall apart.
Right.
Immediately.
I always aim for the loudest person on the other team. If I'm looking across at the other team and there's somebody sitting there shouting orders, you're getting an arrow in the mouth. Because, I'm like that.
Oh, man, and Stygia, like, a quarter of our field right now is archers, so they're everywhere.
Probably a good thing I haven't been able to come out for a while. You don't need one more.
It's great. I love it. I'm getting so much better at dodging arrows.
That's good training, yeah. No, and that's the thing. If you're on a red heavy field, don't worry, you get better at fighting reds. You're on a sword and board heavy field, you're going to get real good at fighting sword and board. There's always training to be had. So before we break today, I just want to ask you, you got any events coming up?
Stygia's events are pretty much done for the year. I'm not sure when I'm next going. It might not be until War of the Gate, which is in June. I'm getting married next year, so it's kind of eating up all of my personal time.
That was this year for me, I feel
Yeah.
you. Okay. Well, again, best of luck to you in the election, and to Hakan and Mud. May the best monster win?
Sure.
I don't know if Mud's a monster. Sorry if I just was derogatory to you, sir, Mr. Person. Thank you guys again for tuning in to The Art of Wargaming. This was Strategic Offense. Tune in next week when we discuss Finding the Chapter Now. Next week, we are going to be discussing Deployment. Actually, this is one of my favorite chapters. I can't believe I forgot that. So, tune in next week for Deployment. Hopefully, Oni will be back with us, but thank you again, Thumbs.
Oh, no problem. This
for
was
coming
fun.
on. And we'll hopefully have you on again. So, this was the Nightmare Box Presents The Art of Wargaming, signing off.